you have realized your master degree, you obtained your master degree at political sciences in Paris, and you obtained your PhD thesis at the University of Montreal. And in 2011, you have published a quite astonishing book called Le Cahier d'Aziz au cœur de la Révolution iranienne, the book of Aziz in the heart of the Iranian Revolution. And in 2015, you have realized another contribution to this, to the study of the Iranian Revolution, this time at the documentary filmic contribution called Hitch, an Iranian history that has been highly prized in France. And in a couple of years later, you have opened a new research field, this time with a series of colleagues on the prisoners of the transit zones in Paris, namely in the airport of Paris. So my first question to you will be, what is being an anthropologist today in CNRS and École des Études in Paris, and what are your research fields, and how you could you tell us a little bit how you developed this research field? Why did you choose this and this research field? Why first of all you have been interested in Iranian Revolution, and second, why you have chosen this second research field on the transit zones of the airports in Paris? And this issue is, of course, a European issue. In many other countries, I think that we observe these transit zones, which are a microcosm, quite difficult to understand with their institutions, their rules. So if you could just tell us a little bit about these issues.
Yes, thank you very much, Hamit. Actually, the research on migration control is my first field of research. I did not want to become a researcher first or an anthropologist. I was working as an activist inside detention migration center. So it's a closed center that is at Roissy Charles de Gaulle Airport, and it's a prison-like holding space for undocumented migrants, asylum seekers, travelers coming from the global south. And I entered this zone as a legal assistant, and I very quickly realized there was a paradox in using the law in order to resist those state practices. So by working there, I first encountered actually different uses of the law and how states, Western rule of laws can use the law as a way to reconduct specific forms of state violence. So this idea that the law is not only something that can help counter violence and push it back. So you are creating, a legal apparatus in order to contain violence. So this is not exactly what is happening in our contemporary democracies. And I was fascinated by how violence and the law can coexist, and how the law can become also a tool for specific forms of state violence. So this is why exactly I decided to lead a research. So first an activist, then wanting to understand things. And this is why I choose the tool of legal anthropology that helps put in perspective rules and laws in relation to how they're applied, the specific context and who applies them, the administrative culture, and all the leeway for action that those state agents have to actually apply or not certain regulations or certain laws. So I wanted to understand this paradox that the more civil society is getting organized in Europe, and I think it's the same in the global north in other countries, the more civil society is organized in order to defend migrant rights and wins legal battles, the more on the other side, extreme right ideas are getting high in the within society and in elections, and migrant detention and access to global north is deteriorating for people coming from the global south. So how to understand this paradox, and how to understand how countries in the global north are ruling non-citizens through laws. So this was my first field of study, and then after my PhD, I went on with the same perspective of looking at state practices from the margins. And this is maybe what connects my two research fields. It's a question of method. It's a question of using a lot what Michel Foucault calls the toolbox he's been building and putting at the disposal of people doing empirical research. So it's more of a methodological and theoretical approach that I bring from the borders of Western democracies into historical anthropological perspective on the Islamic Republic and the Iranian Revolution of 1979. And what does it mean to look at the Iranian Revolution from the margins? It means, for me, it meant collecting testimonies, stories, and squattered archives that give another perspective, like a reverse shot on the Iranian Revolution, and help us write another genealogy of state formation after 1979 in Iran. And this sheds light on the function of state violence in instituting the Iranian state after the revolution, and the uses and the different forms and experiences of violence. So my focus is still on the different experiences and forms of state violence, legal violence, and the ways in which it is anthropological. It's because it's at the borders for migration control, as well as for studying the Iranian Revolution. You build a knowledge through intersubjectivity, and you build a knowledge through writing. So either you write with words or you write with images, but the role of writing and intersubjectivity is, for me, what really distinguishes anthropological approach.
Thank you so much, and I think that it's a very interesting question. You presented your material as materials coming from the margins of the Iranian Revolution, and at the same time you are among those scholars that remind us that the Iranian Revolution didn't start as an Islamist contest. On the contrary, it has started as a democratic contest. The left-wing movements were very important, and until, let's say, mid-1978, no one could predict that the Iranian Revolution would become an Islamic revolution. And it is very interesting to see that these democratic aspirations, democratic demands of change in 1977, 1978, have led to a radical conservative revolution. And you work on this country, but also on this period. It means that you don't have a proximity with your field for two reasons, at least, because the field is far away, and very few scholars now today can go to Iran, but the field is also far away in time. So you have to master a double estrangement, estrangement in space, and estrangement in time, and that differentiates you from many other anthropologists that can quite easily reach their field, spend time, 6 months, sometimes 1 year, 2 years, returning back. Some of them, they can establish a historical memory because that's their field that they explore during 20, 25 years, which is not your case. So what does it mean to be at distance, to be far away in time and space from one's own field and working on this field?
Yes, it's a very difficult, it was a very difficult decision to work without access to the field and to pursue research once the field was closed to me. The field was closed after the publication of the book, as is in the book, in 2011, and I haven't been going back to Iran since 2007. So indeed, it's and it's very interesting because I built my the theoretical and methodological frame of my research project called Offsite, which is reflecting on how to lead empirical fieldwork at offsite, at a distance. I worked on it in 2018 and 19, and at the time it was considered with a lot of circumspection by anthropologist colleagues, which I totally understand, because the strength of anthropological knowledge is ethnography and presence on the field, of course. But then COVID-19 happened, and through the global pandemics, then I was invited to talk to students about how to lead those kind of research at a distance. So I guess also our discipline has become like as a matter of pragmatism, has accepted this idea of research at a distance, because the ways in which field work has become impossible throughout the pandemics. But my decision was not linked to, let's say, an impossibility of linked to a context. It was more of a scientific and political decision that aroused from a certain analysis of the power-knowledge nexus and the type of knowledge production on Iran at a time where having access to the field, going back and forth to this country in order to lead empirical research meant actually framing one's research in certain ways and accepting not to discuss certain topics. So basically what helped me problematize the importance of doing research at a distance was this notion of red lines that exist in within the Iranian society. Iranians know what red lines are, and they use this concept every day in order to refer to all the things they are not allowed to discuss publicly or to investigate, otherwise they will have problems. And these red lines are the borders of the public and the public sphere and the political participation. And it's very interesting because this idea of this notion of red line, the very expression red line, exists both in Iran but also in other countries, in other languages. It exists in Arabic and it's used by Moroccan to refer to exactly the same thing, and it's also used by Chinese citizens to refer to the kind of leeway of action and political participation that they have within the frame of an authoritarian state. So if you think about the red lines, if you stay within the red lines, then you can cross the national borders. So these political boundaries become national borders for us and for us researchers, and of course for the Iranians. So the conclusion was, in order to investigate topics that are beyond the red lines, then you have to renounce to this circulation, to this mobility in and out the national borders. And it was very important to understand that this was not only a personal problem, but it was really a structural and a political problem that faced every researcher who work on Iran. In the sense that if you knowledge production is not, I'm not saying that researchers who work on Iran are kind of being consenting to the borders and the boundaries that the Iranian state is putting. I'm not saying that researchers who work on Iran are producing a discourse that is kind of tries to stay very cautious, not, going dangerous places where they could have problem with the regime, which means that is not critical or does not, question the nature, for instance, of the Islamic Republic. It's not about being obedient to a political power. It's about building the conditions of possibility of research. And in order to pursue an academic career or researcher career, you have to have access to the field. So basically, it's the methodological rules of the discipline of anthropology, that is empirical presence on the field, that lead researchers to kind of renounce to certain subjects or not be critical. So this is what I mean when I'm talking about the power-knowledge nexus. And in order to break that or to disarticulate that, well, you cannot change the state. You cannot put yourself, or you don't want to put yourself and your informants in danger. So what you can do is to work on the methodology. And to say, okay, I can produce a knowledge without being present on the field, and this will allow me not to be dependent on the boundaries that are instituted by the political power. So this is the reason why I've built that methodology. And to answer to the second part of the question, which was the time of the research. I am working on the past, on the first decade after the Iranian Revolution, because there is a gap within the Iranian studies and the knowledge on the Iranian contemporary history on this decade of the 1980s. So there is a need to fill up this gap. How do you work at a temporal distance from the events that you're covering? Well, I mean, at HESS, a lot is being done in the field of anthropological history or historical anthropology. For instance, I have been influenced by the work of Michel Napels on the history of Kanak colonialism and how it impacts modes of conflictuality and violence in today Kanaki. So this is very important in the sense that what I'm looking at is not the historical truth about the Iranian Revolution, but it's more the different memories and memory politics that exist about this event. And so it goes back to the conception or this kind of analysis of Walter Benjamin, saying that you want to catch up memory when it emerges, when it flashes at a moment of danger. So what is the actuality of this past in the sense of, and it's very, very in relation with what is happening right now in Iran, which means how the history of the institution and the genesis of the Islamic Republic is reshaping the rules and forms of political participation in Iran and within the transnational Iranian community abroad.
Thank you. I will come back to the current situation in Iran, but I want to insist a little bit more on this issue of time and space, because we know that any field presents ambiguities, any field presents polysemies, systematic approaches. The discourses are never clear cut, etc. But that's the condition of the mutual understanding, these contradictions, this ambiguous formula, etc. In your case, I think that there is something going beyond just these ambiguities, going beyond also the pure red lines that one can observe in many authoritarian states. And time intervenes here because there was a very brutal repression of time, suppression of time. Time has been brutalized. Before the memory, the time itself has been brutalized. The time of generations, the time of gender, the time of women, for instance, the time of ethnic groups, the time of left-wing movements, the time of, to some extent, also some Islamist movements. And this brutalization of the time that took place and that continues to some extent, but which has marked the entire first decade of the Iranian Revolution, is one of the most important points of your research too. And the book of Aziz, like the book of Elias, it has a biblical almost echo. Could you tell us a little bit on this book and the impact that this book has exerted not only on the Iranian studies, but globally speaking, on the anthropological studies in France? And I would say that actually it has been much more important for anthropology as a discipline rather than for Iranian studies. The Iranian studies have, to some extent, in France at least, ignored this book, and this ignorance or this not seeing an important book is in itself very important. Just if you could present, I know that that's a very sensitive issue, but if you could say just a couple of words on this book.
Absolutely. So it's Aziz's notebook, and it's very interesting the difference between book and notebook, in the sense that when my grandfather wrote the testimony, I think that he was very far from imagining that one day it will be a book. So the existence of this piece of writing as a book in itself, and the circulation from Iran to France and the publication abroad, I think is something that is very revealing about the potentiality of time in response to the brutalization of time. So this is also something that was at the heart of my documentary Hitch about state denial and politics of silence. It is about how when time is brutalized, as you say, when silence is producing amnesia or forgetting, there are traces that are left and that can be reactivated afterwards. And there is this afterwards of going back on things that have been left behind, those traces, in order to reactivate the potentiality of resistance that they kind of unearth or dig or put aside or preserve, actually, is something that I also am working with in terms of, as you say, working today on something that happened in the past. So the notebook for me is one of those things that illustrate, this extract of poetry written by a Polish homosexual poet who said they thought they will burying us, but they didn't know we were grains. So this is exactly what is happening here. The notebook is very, I think it's what makes the specificity of this testimony. There are several specificities. One of them is the literary dimension of it. So it was published by Gallimard, and from the start, for me, it was very obvious, and for my publisher as well, that there is a literary dimension to that. It's not only about the factual information of what is being conveyed, but it's also about this act of writing and testifying from a man who has never taken a pen, as he says, is not a learned person. He was a worker and later an employee in the oil field in Iran, in the Iranian oil company, national oil company. So it is not coming from someone who is a learned person, who is a practiced writer. It's not a testimony about what happened precisely to him, but more about what happened to his daughters, so my mother and my aunt. And this is the other specificity of this testimony. We did have actually a prison literature that was born in Iran in the early 1990s. And it was written by former political prisoners, survivors of the 1988 massacre, who were exiled abroad, and they started writing abroad. So and they wrote about, so if we can talk about politics of denial that have been very persistent in the Iranian society, because as you know, President Ibrahim Raisi, who's now in power, is one of the perpetrators of the 88 massacres, and he didn't impeach him of becoming a president 30 years later. On the contrary, we see how actors of perpetrators of violence have progressed in political and administrative hierarchy. But this prison literature is about what is happening in the face-to-face world of prisons between prisoners and their perpetrators and Iranian authorities. And it's a face-to-face with a psychotic power by people who are developing forms of resistance, but are confronted, are cut from society. It's very important. I think that this generation of Iranians who lived through those practice of violence did their duty of testimony, even if they were not read widely and were not studied widely abroad and not at all in Iran. But what we didn't have until as this notebook was a testimony about what happened for the families of the prisoners. So it goes beyond, you know, the face-to-face between the prisoner and the perpetrator, and it puts back the prison world within the wider social worlds in which prison violence has its own effects. And I think it's very important to break at one point the duality and go into at least a triangle between people who have been killed or imprisoned, a state apparatus who is governing through those violence, and also the wider social groups who are living those kind of experiences of violence, not for themselves, but as relatives of prisoners. And it is through what is happening on the prison families that actually prison authorities are ruling over society. So what the notebook shows, and what I've been working on since the publication of this notebook, so in the last 10 years, is how actually through prison violence and massacres, Iranian authorities have been imposing violence on the wider social frames and disrupting wider social frames. And this is what my grandfather's testimony is showing very well, by also giving detailed account and almost ethnographic account on the institution of the Islamic Republic after the revolution, where it was not clear where this new regime was going. So he shows in his account how paralegal, legal, and extra-legal systems, so the Hezbollah militias were extra-legal, the corps of the Guardian of the Revolution and the Basijis were paralegal, and also in some ways the revolutionary court who have paralegal dimensions, and then the legal dimension of the government and the supreme leader and the propaganda and the discourse. All these three dimensions are like in a Möbius ribbon, in a Möbius strip. They are linked together, and this is how actually the Islamic Republic took shape. So this is shown in a very ethnographic way in this testimony.
It is very important that you remind the formation of the Islamic Republic as at once legal because it had institutions, paralegal because these paralegal structures, they were also institutionalized, and extra-legal. And the killings of 1988 were absolutely extra-legal, and they have been decided by a man, Ayatollah Khomeini, who was at that moment 88 years old. So renewing his power, his age, his mission through the killing of thousands of prisoners who were in their 20s, in their 30s. And I think that this issue is not only an important issue for the historians, but it is also a founding act of the Islamic Republic, post-Khomeini Islamic Republic. Just for those, for the listener, I will remind that Khomeini has passed away only 1 year later at 89 years old in 1989. But this brings me to maybe also to your methodology, because you are working a lot on the traces, on the left behinds. You mentioned Walter Benjamin, and for Walter Benjamin, of course, the history is not only the global narratives, the history also what is left behind, and what is left behind concerns so different groups. And the destruction of the traces is one of the modes of domination. And we saw that in Iran, but not only in Iran. You see that in the Armenian genocide, after much of the Armenian genocide during the Shoah, in Iran, in Iraq of Saddam Hussein, in many places you see this will of destroying any kind of traces after the murder, after the brutalization, after the violence. And at the same time, the contest is a way of finding traces and giving a meaning to these traces, making these traces communicate between each other. And in your anthropology, this finding the traces is plays a very important role. And you became to some extent a detective, launching the counter investigations against not only to counterbalance the investigation of the state, but showing that the real trial has not yet taken place, that the anthropologist's counter investigation will lead to a real trial, not only for the social sciences, but maybe tomorrow in another juridical perspective.
Yes. So this was very important, the notion of inquiry and investigation and counter investigation. The way I've been writing the film Hitch is, for me, it's totally a work of visual anthropology and anthropological investigation that is also using the tools of cinema, but as a practice of knowledge as well. So why is it a counter investigation? It was something between the quest and the inquiry, enquête et quête. So it was not clear, and as you say, it's very ambiguous. That it's in a kind of a gray zone between different postures of research. And for me, it's not bad to keep this polysemy or this multi-dimensional approach. Why is it a counter investigation? Because in order to work on the 1988 massacre, we would need to investigate very clearly and give clear answers to basic factual questions. How many prisoners have been killed? When? How? By whom? Where are they buried? What happened to their bodies? What happened to the people who killed them, etc. The problem is that, of course, the state doesn't want to do this investigation. The state is denying the facts, and today we are there is the trial in appeal of an assistant prosecutor at the Gohadash prison in Tehran, who was working under also under the orders of Ibrahim Raisi at the time, and the trial is taking place in Stockholm according to universal jurisdiction, and this let's say a state-level bureaucrat of violence is being prosecuted for war crimes in 1988, and his lawyers are denying the mere fact that a massacre took place or people have been killed. because of course there is no evidence that can be shown by a Stockholm court or by the prosecutors in Stockholm. And it's very interesting because they are the defense argument is the following: why aren't you leading an investigation in Iran, and why don't you go and see the places in Iran in the prison so that you can have the answers by the prison authorities in Iran? So of course the prison authorities in Iran will not, even if they receive the team, they will not tell them what happened, because we are in highly trained practices of state denial that happens in many other cases of state violence, of course. But in the case of Iran, what I want to say is that the fact-checking and establishing the facts is on the shoulder of the victims, because neither the perpetrators want to of course, open their archive. They're still in power, nor can, let's say, an independent, body or judicial arena today have access to such archives or such proofs. And for me, there's a problem in accepting this situation of putting the burden of the proof on the shoulder of the victims, who are victims not only of state violence, but also of politics of denial for the last 40 years. So this is why I did not even try to engage into an investigative practice that would follow the episteme of fact-checking. So it's so basically the choice at the start is an epistemic choice. The episteme of fact-checking is how do you establish truth? How do you establish a fact? You go, you find proofs, you cut sources, one testimony is not enough, you need several testimonies, you need to prove how these testimonies are truthful, trustable, etc. And I will not engage in that for now, because for me time has not come, because we still are in politics of denial. And what shows best this state of being is that the images I was producing were kind of being erased or self-destroying before I could use them for my movie, and I will come there. So if you cannot do that, what will the investigation be about? For me, the investigation was about those traces that do not belong to the episteme of fact-finding and fact-checking. And this is why also this is allowed by the discipline of anthropology and ethnohistory, but it's something that is less easy to do, let's say, in political science or in sociology. It's this epistemic question of how do you work with your data, how do you work with truth-finding, the establishment of truth, and which kind of episteme do you use. So my investigation, as I say, was more about, I was not looking for the fingerprints of the criminal, but I was looking for the fingerprints of the victims. What can you find in those kind of traces, the left behind, as you say, when they are not used as forensic evidence? So it's counter-forensic in this sense, in the epistemic sense, and this is why it's counter-investigative in two meanings, because it's telling a story that is not told in the public space, but it's also telling it not trying to build established truth, but looking at what kind of memories are being transmitted, are being kept, and this means paying a specific attention to emotions, using emotion as traces as well. And this is also something that Walter Benjamin shows us as a direction for research, when he says that you have the nostalgia of the historian, to say so, is not about only the fact that he or she can never know how it actually was in the past, but it's also a nostalgia that is linked to a way of putting oneself in echo with the dreams of future that the people who have been vanquished in history had. So what were their emotions? What were their dreams of future? Those revolutionaries who have been smashed and killed or exiled externally or even internally, what did they dream about? What kind of future did they have in mind? And finding again, these unborn futures, dreams of futures, is a way to put oneself and not be anachronic, to put oneself in echo with those events that happened in the past. What I tried to do, when I kind of took those decisions that are methodological and theoretical decisions, then finding my field, my empirical data, was about going back to the objects. And here again, the anthropological studies are building a robust field of knowledge about material culture and the importance of objects, their circulation, their different meanings, etc. So I worked with objects, I worked with images, and I worked with emotions. And I took all of these as actually traces that help mapping trajectory of a narrative that would deactivate silence.
Thank you so much. So you are involved in anthropology as an anthropologist, and you are involved in cinema, in the movie, as an anthropologist. That means that you share also a lot with other movie makers. And I am impressed to see that since 7 or 8 years, we have a new form of movies in Iran. We had the wave of movies after Khomeini, Kiarostami and others, Where is the House of My Friend? And those movies, they were a form of inventing the historias minimas, the small histories that were not political but had a very political meaning. And since some 10 years, I have the impression that the movie makers, they have become much more harsh. The language of the movies, they have become much more violent. Just take 6.5, which has been presented in France under the title of The Law of Tehran, or take a movie such as The Devil Does Not Exist. So you are a part also of a broader intellectual microcosmos in France and in Europe, probably to some extent also in Iran. Also, it cannot be, you cannot have direct connections today with Iran. And overall in this intellectual microcosmos, we have the impression that there is a plurality of language of creation, but also a renewal of language of creation, a plurality of languages of interpretation, but also modes of interpretations that are renewed. So there are a lot of changes that one can observe from, let's say, 1989 to 1999, from 1999, the fraudulent re-election of Ahmed, to 2009, sorry, the fraudulent election of Ahmadinejad, the President Ahmadinejad in 2009 to today. So can you tell us a little bit your place in this intellectual microcosmos and the common languages, the bridges that we can establish with other forms of creation, intellectual creation, artistic or not?
Yes. So it's very generous of you. I'm more learning about, and learning from these artistic practices than really in conversation with them, or I'm in conversation with them in my head or in my work, but not. I'm learning a lot from them. And I think what happened also is there is something else. I think that must be mentioned, is that what Asghar Farhadi did. With his films, of course, Separation, but also his first movies. But with A Separation, what he did is that he opened up a Western and world audience to the social Iranian cinema. So there was a tradition of social cinema in Iran. And the woman movie maker Bani Etemad is one of the main representative of this cinema social cinema that is addressing social issues, social violence, all different stratas of society. But before Farhad Asghar Farhadi, it was not the kind of cinema that was being sold outside of Iran. And what he did is like he merged the tradition of Kiarostami, of more contemplative and in legacy of Iranian poetry, and Iranian cinema, social cinema, and he merged those two trends and opened up the way for more social cinema. So I think this existed even before 2009 as well. As for me, in my cinema, I mean, in the work that I've been doing, I was very much inspired by documentary makers who today are really questioning the borders, the boundaries between documentary and fiction, of course, and between documentary cinema and other forms of documentation. And going back to that border, the boundaries between, you know, documentary cinema and other forms of documentation, and maybe illustrating what I mean by working with traces, you know, in relation with the politics of denial. I can maybe show what I've been, you know, some images of what one of the subjects that I'm treating in the movie Hitch, that is actually the destruction of the graves that you are that you talked about. So I worked with one of the stories I worked with was the grave of my aunt Fataneh Zorei, who was executed, and it's her story is told by my grandfather as is in his notebook. She was executed in 1982 along with her husband, and she was executed in the city of Bandar Abbas, which was not the city where my family lived. It's a port city close to the you know, on the east of Iran. And it's a city where a lot of political activists in the very early 1980s went with the hope of crossing the border to Pakistan. And so they were living there in Bandar Abbas, and I'm saying that it's important. So a lot of the political activists who are executed in Bandar Abbas do not belong to this city. And their grave was the section of the cemetery that is called the section of the executees, was a very old and far section, you know, at the end of the official cemetery of the city, and it was broken. It was not taken care of. It was, you know, between cemetery and actually kind of a mass gravey dimension. And what happened is that in 2009, the city of Bandar Abbas decided, because of urban planning, to build a road that would go on that cemetery. And what the families did is that they unite, and they went and mobilized and saw the city council in order to what the city council agreed to do is to build this kind of terre-plein, something in the middle of the road, in order that would be exactly on the location of the destroyed graves. So the graves are under this this soil, but the road is not passing on them. Okay, and what I did is that at a distance, through internet and social networks, I documented this mobilization, this resistance, family mobilization, and also what happens to this grave and reconstruction. So this is the building, and then what happened is that there is an employee from the cemetery who accepted to put little stones on these. So this is this grass is on that little space in the middle of the road. So he put those little stones, and it's very interesting. This is the grave of the husband of my uncle, the husband of my aunt. He has been killed in the street a few months before her, and he put a little poem. And he decided, the family didn't ask him, he put a little poem, he wrote a little poem on this little mark, and the poem says, the secret that I have in my heart, my soul says, shout it, because you are being strangled by it. So so then, you know, families were coming there, and it became a trace on the public space that was even more visible than before. And it's very interesting because when I did interviews with the family, they said, yes, it's better like this and it's more visible now, but we preferred it before because it was a trace of violence. And what happened is that in 2017, so basically I built my movie around this history, and my idea was to go and find that employee, city council employee, and understand what, you know, pushed him to do this work of memory by himself, etc. But what happened is that while I was in the middle of editing the movie, my shooting was done, there was a phone call from Iran, and then actually overnight they destroyed that place, and they built the road on it. And so the road went again on the graves. But when this happened, the people, the person I was interviewing in my movie, and I did shooting with her, and her testimony was there, didn't want to be in the movie anymore, because what this destruction showed was the actuality actually of this memory and this history of violence, and how it was still important for the state, and it was still something that was a red line. So here you can see why I'm so keen on this notion of the red line, because you can see a red line here. So all of a sudden this witness realized that she has crossed. This is actually a red line. This is what the state is saying by destroying the traces. And it's interesting because destroying the traces is not something that happens once and for all. Every several years, the authorities have to kind of update the politics of denial. So when she understands that she's been crossing a red line, she retrieved her testimony. And it's very interesting, and this is why I say that doing the movie, shooting the movie and editing was for me an empirical field work. It's because she's saying, you can keep my voice, but you cannot show my face. So the editor and the producer were telling me, well, if we have her voice, and if she says that she's from the family of, you know, the person who's being buried here, then everyone, you know, not everyone, but the people who will want to know from the intelligence, they will know who she is. So what's the point of keeping the voice? And I was trying to explain to them, and this is the red line, and this is the form of social knowledge that is being built around the red line by the Iranian population. The importance is not telling the story. The importance is showing that you're afraid of telling the story. So if you tell the story with your open face, then you show that not only you're telling this story of violence, but you're not afraid of doing it. And this is dangerous for you, and because it's dangerous for the state, because it's the politics of fear that is being put in question. So the importance is not to say this happened. The importance is to question the status quo and the politics of fear that is built on upon what happened. So the fact that we only kept the voice and we erased the face is something that helped us understand what is a red line, how it functions, and what those politics of fears are around politics of denial. At the end of the day, you know, through a process of self-censorship, and it will be very long to get into that, and I will not, but I've written on it, I totally suppressed those testimonies, either audio or video from the final cut of the movie. But if you go back, to the movie itself and the different forms of documentations and techniques of documentation. So we had, you know, I showed you on the ground the different videos that have been taken with mobile phone and sent to me. And actually, you know, a WhatsApp thread can become a micro archive, and this is how I used it. But then if you go and use Google Earth, and this is what I did, then you can see another story, and you can undig the archaeology of violence. So look at this image. This is what has been taken in 2017. After, you can see the road is being built, and then if you go back in time, see, you have it, and what you understand exactly is that actually the images that I have, so those images are not this this place in the middle of the road is not the same than, you know, it's a little bit below. It's a little bit below. It's not the same. So it's only with satellite imagery that I could understand, and the families could understand, that actually the road is passing on the graves, because they thought that it was being bulldozed down, and it was being they were putting cement on it, but they didn't think that the road was changing its place. But actually, what you can see with satellite imagery is that it's the road that has changed its
orientation.
Yeah, its trace. And you can go back and you can see, you know, this archaeology of violence.
That was fascinating, dear Chowra, and I think that it's very interesting to see that the policy of destruction of traces has to up-to-date itself constantly, and I think that this issue of the cemeteries, destroying the cemeteries, has always been a very important tool for some powers. But at the same time, it's very interesting to see also that the victims or the witnesses or the memory keepers, because working in a graveyard does mean also to be a memory keepers. They try to negotiate different relations with the graves, generosity, small gestures, small poems, little objects, or this will of keeping the traces of violence, past violence. This past violence had to remain eternally as an act of violence, and I think that all this, they are very, very interesting. I wanted to ask you very many other questions, namely on what's going on in Iran, your implication in the debate on the contemporary Iran, the current Iran. But I think that we will not have any more time, so maybe we will have an opportunity in the near future to cover these very important issues. But just to remind our listeners that you have been quite widely present in the debate, scientific debate on the current manifestations in Iran and the wave of repression. So maybe we can stop here and to collect some questions.
How the Aziz's notebook has not been received within Iranian studies. I think that the conditions of possibility of building a knowledge about what happened in the Iranian 1980s, which goes beyond the red line, was not something that was commonly agreed upon within the field of Iranian studies. And it's exactly, you know, in order to kind of impulse a change in this situation that I decided to initiate the project offsite. But maybe today, with what is happening right now in Iran, these conditions of possibility, the kind of knowledge that is being built, what is sayable and audible is shifting, is changing, and so maybe greater attention will be paid to the Iranian 1980s.
No, I think that it is a very important point because all the history of brutalities, executions, even war history in the Iranian studies, they have been considered as footnotes to the Iranian history, to the history of the Republic of Iran. And that's very strange because power is based on thanatos, power is based on the right of killing, on the right of murder. Sovereignty is determined in the right of, in the name of, by capacity of murdering. The authority is negotiated or imposed by this act and at the same time, all this is placed in a football. That's not only the case of Iran. When you take the Armenian genocide, during decades, people could, some historians could write the history of Turkey in which there was no mention to the Armenian genocide, or that was just a small information or just take Iraq, and the case of Iraq, the neighboring Iraq. Many people analyzed Iraq, the Saddam Hussein regime or the Ba'athist regime, either in geopolitical terms or in terms of a socialist power that has become brutal, but still, etc. So this kind of approach that we had also actually concerning, for instance, Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, that's very interesting. And I think that I hope that the shift in the Iranian studies will take place. But the question, as an overall question linked to the studies of the authoritarian regimes or the totalitarian regimes, will still be there for a while being.
Yeah, it's very interesting also because when Hannah Arendt in her writings on totalitarianism she's doing that in some parts. She's saying other thinkers will find it superficial. She's using this weird word. I know that colleagues will find it superficial to dwell on horrors or gruesome details, but and she's almost, justifying herself of working on the Gulag and the concentration camps at a time where not many people were looking at that. Yeah.
So there is no questions for what is done. So we will stop our discussion today. Thank you so much, dear Chowra. And tomorrow we will have another session